I've always believed that experience counts for something. When you've dedicated 2 full decades of your life to a company, building systems, solving problems nobody else could fix, mentoring generations of employees, you tend to think that respect is earned. At TechCore Inc., where I'd spent the last 20 years as a senior IT manager, I was proud of my work, proud of the teams I helped build, proud of the infrastructure I helped maintain, proud of the fact that I knew the ins and outs of our systems better than anyone else. That morning started like any other. I arrived at the office early, the sun still low, and the city streets just beginning to buzz with life. My cubicle was the same as always, cluttered with manuals, sticky notes, and a couple of family photos. My wife Helen smiling at the camera, my daughter Emily in her graduation gown. I like to keep those reminders close. They grounded me through long workdays and late nights, troubleshooting network crashes. Today was special, though. We had a new intern starting, Tyler, bright kid, freshly graduated from a nearby college, eager to learn the ropes. I'd always taken pride in mentoring young talent, guiding them not just through technical tasks, but also office politics, professional etiquette, and those little tricks you don't find in textbooks. To me, passing on knowledge was part of the job, maybe even the most rewarding part. I remember sitting down next to Tyler just after 9 a.m., booting up my workstation. The fluorescent office lights hummed overhead. The usual sounds surrounded us, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the distant hum of the server room. I began showing Tyler the network topology diagrams, explaining how data packets flowed through our systems and how to spot bottlenecks before they became outages. Tyler was soaking it all in, eyes wide, nodding eagerly. We dove into troubleshooting techniques, how to interpret error logs, how to isolate failing nodes, and even how to keep a cool head when everything's falling apart. I shared some war stories, like the time a critical server went down during a product launch, and how we fixed it just minutes before disaster. Tyler laughed at some of my dry humor, asked thoughtful questions, and for a little while, I felt that spark of purpose reignite. Here I was, still valuable, still teaching, still relevant. But then, things took a sharp, unexpected turn. Robert Harrison, our CEO, was not a man known for his warmth or approachability. His reputation was well earned, cold, distant, and notoriously impatient with anyone he considered past their prime. I'd seen him walk by the IT floor plenty of times, usually without so much as a nod. But that day he stopped right beside my cubicle. I looked up, expecting maybe a brief greeting or a question about some company-wide tech initiative. Instead, I saw something else in his eyes. Disapproval, annoyance, something bordering on contempt. "What's going on here?" he barked, voice sharp enough to make nearby colleagues glance over. I explained I was mentoring Tyler, helping him understand some of the network basics. I thought that would be seen as a good thing. After all, investing in young talent was part of our mission. But Robert's face darkened. "Mentoring? Looks like you're just wasting company time," he sneered, loud enough for a few coworkers to hear. Then came the words I wasn't prepared for, the ones that hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're an old fart, Grant. You're holding this company back." There it was, the dismissal, the insult, the erasure of 20 years of dedication in 2 brutal words. The room seemed to freeze. Tyler looked down, his youthful enthusiasm crushed in an instant. I sat there, numb, unable to process what I'd just heard. Before I could even muster a response, Robert called over an HR representative and coldly ordered, "Pack up his things. He's done here." No warning, no chance to explain, no conversation. Just the swift execution of a decision made behind closed doors. I watched in disbelief as the HR rep handed me a box and started to clear my desk. I gathered my belongings slowly, my worn notebook filled with years of notes, a photo of my family, a mug that read, "World's Okayest IT Guy." Each item felt heavier than the last, like I was packing away a lifetime of memories. The atmosphere around me was thick with awkward silence. Some coworkers avoided eye contact, others whispered quietly among themselves. Tyler gave me a brief, sympathetic nod before slipping away. I wanted to tell him this wasn't his fight, that this wasn't about him, but I couldn't find the words. As I walked out of the building, box in hand, a wave of emotions crashed over me. Humiliation, anger, confusion, sadness. I kept asking myself, why? Was it really just because I was getting older, because I was out of date? Or was there something deeper going on? Over the years, I'd seen politics at play. I'd heard rumors of backroom deals and shifting alliances. Maybe Robert wanted to make a statement. Maybe I was in the way of something bigger. Whatever it was, it didn't make it any easier. That day, everything changed. I went from being a respected veteran to a disposable relic, discarded without explanation. But as I stood outside TechCore's glass doors, staring at the skyline, I realized something else. I wasn't finished yet. If anything, this was just the beginning of a new fight, one that would require all the grit, knowledge, and perseverance I'd accumulated over the years. Because when someone throws you away that easily, you start to wonder what they're trying to hide. That afternoon, when I finally left the TechCore building for the last time, the weight of everything I'd built over 20 years seemed to fall away like dust from my shoulders. Walking out of those glass doors, box in hand, I felt less like a seasoned IT manager and more like a ghost drifting away from a life I barely recognized anymore. My cubicle, once a cluttered sanctuary filled with decades of notes, pictures of my grandkids, little keepsakes from coworkers, now stood empty, silent, stripped bare of all the personality I'd poured into it. I paused just long enough to glance back one last time. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, but the space felt cold, unwelcoming, and oddly sterile. It was as if my entire career had been erased in a moment, wiped clean like some forgotten file. Sitting in my car, the box of personal effects resting on the passenger seat, I struggled to make sense of the whirlwind. I kept hearing the CEO's cutting words echoing in my mind. Old fart, like a cruel mocking refrain. I'd heard ageism whispered around the office before, jokes about the old guard clinging to outdated methods, but I never thought it'd come down to this, a public brutal dismissal framed like some petty insult. And worse yet, no warning, no conversation, no chance to explain or even say goodbye. Just a cold cutoff, like I was an obstacle that needed clearing. I'd always taken pride in my work, 20 years of loyalty, 20 years of steady dedication, and now it was like all that counted for nothing. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Had my performance really slipped? I scanned my memory for any incident, any mistake that could justify this harsh blow, but nothing came up. If anything, I'd been mentoring that intern, Tyler, with genuine care, sharing everything I knew, trying to pass the torch. And yet, it seemed that very act was what sealed my fate. The drive home was a blur. Traffic lights, passing cars, familiar streets. They all felt strangely disconnected from what was happening inside my head. I was engulfed by a swirling mix of confusion, anger, and disappointment. For years, I'd built relationships at TechCore, not just with colleagues, but with the company itself, almost like a second family. To be dismissed so quickly, so harshly, was a shock to my core. It made me question everything, my value, my future, even my identity. At home, Helen greeted me with a hug, but I could tell she was holding back tears. She'd seen me through layoffs before, but nothing like this, nothing this personal. I sat down with my box on the kitchen table, unwrapping the few items I'd managed to grab. A worn mug with the company logo, my old security badge, a photo of Tyler and me laughing during our first day together. These small things suddenly felt like symbols of a chapter closing, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead gnawed at me. I tried to make sense of it all that evening. The CEO's words didn't just sting, they felt like a sign of something deeper. I knew ageism was real in the corporate world, sure, but the more I thought about it, the more I suspected there was more behind my sudden ousting. Over the past several months, I'd noticed subtle changes. Projects I'd been managing suddenly reassigned to younger employees with less experience, budget cuts hitting my department disproportionately, and whispers of new vendor partnerships I hadn't been consulted about. And the CEO? He'd been acting more secretive, less approachable. There was a tension in the air, like something was simmering just beneath the surface. I began to wonder, was I just collateral damage in a bigger game? Had I gotten in the way of something, or someone, more powerful? It wasn't hard to imagine. In my line of work, especially after 2 decades, you see how quickly things can change when leadership shifts. People jockey for power, alliances are made and broken, and sometimes the oldest, most reliable voices get drowned out or silenced altogether. I thought back to the morning I spent mentoring Tyler. He was eager, full of questions, hungry to learn, exactly the kind of young talent TechCore needed, but the CEO's icy glare had told a different story. That look, a mixture of disdain and impatience, told me I wasn't just an old fart standing in the way of progress. I was a threat to a new agenda, one that didn't value experience or loyalty, only blind ambition and rapid results. I couldn't help but feel betrayed. All those years spent navigating the constant tech upheavals, late nights troubleshooting system crashes, and guiding the team through countless product launches, all tossed aside like yesterday's news. It was hard not to see the dismissal as a warning to others, that no matter how much you give, it's never enough. That the only thing that matters is who's sitting in the CEO's chair and what they want. But despite the sting and confusion, a small voice inside me refused to accept defeat. I wasn't the kind of man who gave up quietly. If there was something fishy going on, if this was more than just an ageist swipe, then I needed to find out what it was. I owed it to myself, and to every hard-working person who had been overlooked or pushed aside, to get to the truth. So that night, as the house grew quiet and the world outside settled into darkness, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I made a decision right then and there. I wasn't done yet. I wouldn't let the CEO's insult define my story. I would dig deeper, ask questions, and uncover whatever was hiding beneath the polished surface of TechCore's shiny exterior. Because sometimes, the quietest voices have the loudest stories to tell. After that gut punch of a day, mentoring Tyler in the morning and getting called an old fart and fired by afternoon, I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. My whole world spun, and all I wanted was to crawl under a rock and forget the whole mess. But something kept gnawing at me. It wasn't just the insult or the humiliation. It was the feeling that what happened wasn't just about me. Something was rotten at TechCore, and it went higher than I ever imagined. Once I got home, I barely spoke to Helen about it. She could see the shock and frustration in my eyes, but didn't press. I needed space, time to think. After dinner, once the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, I set up my laptop on the kitchen table. The box with my belongings from the office sat off to the side, a cold reminder of how quickly everything changed. The hum of the fridge was the only sound in the room as the screen flickered to life. I wasn't a tech whiz or some kind of hacker, but I knew my way around systems and data. Over the years, I'd learned that sometimes the smallest details tell the biggest stories. So I started pulling up everything I had access to: emails, project reports, financial spreadsheets, contract files. I sifted through folders I'd quietly copied before my last day. You never know when you'll need backup. At first, it felt like walking blind through a maze. Thousands of emails, dozens of vendor contracts, approval memos flying back and forth. It was overwhelming, but I was determined. I focused on the last 6 months, the period when Tyler came on board, when new projects started popping up that didn't quite make sense. That's when I spotted it. Apex Solutions Group, a vendor that seemed to suddenly appear out of nowhere, landing contract after contract without the usual scrutiny. What was odd was how fast those approvals came through. Normally, deals like that took weeks of review, but these were rubber-stamped in days. Even stranger, some of the projects tied to Apex never got off the ground, yet the invoices kept flowing. I pulled up the payment records and compared them against project timelines and deliverables. Payments were made in full, on time, without questions. But the work, minimal or non-existent. It was money just disappearing. Curiosity turned to suspicion. I started looking into who at TechCore was connected to Apex Solutions. Digging through emails and contact lists, I found links to a handful of executives, and, most alarmingly, direct ties to the CEO himself. These connections weren't subtle. They were carefully hidden behind layers of consultants and shell companies. But I recognized enough patterns from past experiences. I remembered the CEO's cold glare that day, the way he dismissed me with a cruel nickname, and it all clicked. I'd been a threat, not just to the CEO's ego, but to his hidden agenda. Tyler, the bright-eyed intern eager to learn and grow, was a symbol of change. Fresh ideas, transparency, accountability. That scared them. But I wasn't ready to throw in the towel. If anything, this fueled me. I stayed up late into the night, piecing together the puzzle. Every email thread, every payment, every contract. was another piece fitting into a troubling picture of favoritism and financial misconduct. I printed out key emails, flagged suspicious transactions, and made notes on a legal pad. The kitchen table became my war room, cluttered with papers, post-its, and coffee cups. I documented everything meticulously, knowing that if I was going to confront this mess, I had to have solid evidence. No assumptions, no guesses. To protect myself, I worked offline as much as possible, encrypting files and saving backups on external drives. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, knowing that if anyone at TechCore found out, I could be in serious trouble. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just corporate mismanagement or a bad business decision. This was corruption at the highest level, a deliberate scheme to funnel money to cronies under the CEO's watchful eye. I thought about my own career, the years I'd given to the company, and how I'd been cast aside like yesterday's news. But I also thought about Tyler, about the employees who believed in the company's mission, and about the principle of doing what's right. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the kitchen window, I was exhausted but resolute. My eyes burned from staring at screens and papers for hours, and my hands ached from scribbling notes. Yet, I had a strange sense of purpose. I was no longer just a man who got fired. I was someone ready to fight back. Closing the laptop, I took a deep breath and looked around the room. This was just the beginning. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight, and I was determined to bring it to light. The morning sun was barely up when I finally shook off the restless sleep that had become my new normal. The sting of being branded an old fart and dismissed like yesterday's news wasn't fading. It was just transforming. What had started as a gut punch had evolved into a simmering determination to uncover the truth behind the CEO's cold cruelty. I knew in my bones that my firing was no coincidence. There was something rotten at the core of TechCore Inc., and I was the first domino they'd knocked down to keep it hidden. I needed an ally, someone with experience, connections, and a backbone strong enough to help me navigate this minefield. There was only one person I could think of, Linda Harper. Linda had been a respected member of the board for over 15 years, a woman whose reputation for unwavering ethics was well known even among the executives who preferred to play dirty. She was sharp, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal to the company's real mission, not to the CEO's personal agenda. We arranged to meet at a small, nondescript cafe tucked away on a side street downtown, a place far enough from the glitz and corporate bustle where we could talk without prying eyes or overheard whispers. I arrived early, my nerves jangling as I clutched the manila folder that contained the evidence I'd painstakingly compiled. Emails, contracts, internal memos, vendor invoices, and spreadsheets. Each page represented hours of quiet work done late at night, piecing together a puzzle nobody else seemed to notice or care about. Linda walked in with that familiar purposeful stride, dressed in a simple blouse and blazer that somehow still commanded respect without shouting for attention. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, then locked onto mine with a knowing look, a mix of concern and resolve. "Samuel," she greeted me quietly, sliding into the seat across from me. "I've been expecting you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Linda, thank you for meeting with me on such short notice. What I've uncovered, it's serious, worse than I thought." She raised an eyebrow. "Walk me through it." I slid the folder toward her, watching as she flipped open the cover and began leafing through the documents. "These are contracts awarded to Apex Solutions Group," I said, pointing at the first few pages. "No one at TechCore knows what Apex actually does. There are no records of work completed, no project deliverables, no real employees tied to the company. But look here, millions have been paid out over the last year alone." Linda's eyes narrowed. "And you're saying these payments are fraudulent?" I nodded. "More than that. Apex is owned by the CEO's brother-in-law. This wasn't disclosed anywhere in the company's financial statements or ethics filings. The payments were fast-tracked through approval channels, bypassing the usual checks and balances. When I questioned the finance department, they were stonewalled or told to look the other way." Linda exhaled slowly, pushing her glasses up her nose. "That's blatant nepotism and fraud. How deep does this go?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Deeper than I can fully prove yet. But there's a pattern. Every time the CEO's family members or close friends need a favor, a contract, or a cash infusion, it's Apex that's the funnel. And the CFO, his closest confidant, has been signing off on these payments without question. Linda tapped her fingers thoughtfully. You've been brave to gather this, but you've also made yourself a target. I swallowed hard. I knew that. When I took Tyler, the new intern, under my wing that morning, showing him the ropes, teaching him how things really worked, I think the CEO saw me as a threat. Maybe he thought I was preparing the next generation to expose the rot. Whatever it was, it didn't sit well with him. That afternoon, I was fired on the spot. No warning, no chance to defend myself. Linda's expression softened. I'm sorry, Samuel. That was low, even for them. But we have to be smart about what comes next. The board isn't a monolith. Some members have their own agendas, and many are too cozy with the CEO's circle to act. I know, I admitted. That's why I need your help. I don't just want to expose this. I want to make sure the company can survive this scandal, that the people who built it with sweat and integrity don't get buried under the fallout. Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We'll have to tread carefully. We need allies on the board who can be trusted to act without tipping off the CEO. And we need airtight evidence. Nothing can be left to doubt or interpretation. I reached into the folder and pulled out a printout of an email chain, the CEO approving a suspicious payment despite warnings from the finance team. This is one example. I've cross-referenced budgets, project reports, and vendor histories. None of it adds up. Apex Solutions is a ghost company, a conduit for money laundering, or worse. Linda studied the paper for a long moment, then closed the folder decisively. You did good work, Samuel. This will shake the foundations of TechCore if it gets out. Are you prepared for the backlash? I hesitated. The truth was, the fear was real. Fear of retaliation, lawsuits, smear campaigns, even physical threats. But what scared me more was the thought of doing nothing. I have to be. I can't let them get away with this. She smiled faintly. Good, because the fight is just beginning. We spent the next hour mapping out a cautious strategy, contacting discreet board members, securing additional copies of sensitive files, and preparing for legal pushback. Linda warned me to keep a low profile, to avoid using company devices or email accounts that could be monitored. As I left the cafe, the folder heavier in my hands, the weight in my chest felt both crushing and oddly liberating. I was no longer just the guy who got fired unfairly. I was a whistleblower, a guardian of truth in a corporate jungle. Back at my small apartment that evening, I spread out every sheet on the dining table, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows. I reread the emails, the invoices, the contract clauses. Each one was a thread in a tangled web of greed and betrayal. I thought about Tyler, the young intern eager to learn, and how I'd tried to show him the ropes with pride. Would he understand why I'd been pushed out so cruelly? Would he carry the torch forward? The road ahead was uncertain. The stakes were high, but one thing was clear. I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. I remember that morning like it was carved into my memory forever. I'd spent weeks, no, months, preparing for this day, knowing full well that everything I'd worked for, every bit of evidence I'd painstakingly collected, was going to be thrown into the harsh light of the company's highest authority, the board of directors. Walking back into TechCore's building for the first time since my firing felt like stepping into an arena where the stakes were life and death. Except this was a battle for truth, justice, and the very soul of the company I'd served for 2 decades. The sky was gray, and a cold wind cut through the parking lot as I parked my old sedan. I sat behind the wheel a moment longer than necessary, taking deep breaths to calm the nervousness gnawing at my gut. Despite all the evidence, despite every fact neatly organized and verified, I couldn't shake the anxiety. I'd been a part of TechCore for so long, and now I was here to blow the whistle on its highest leadership. I'd heard stories of whistleblowers being ostracized, harassed, even ruined. I wondered if I was about to join their ranks. Inside the lobby, the receptionist barely looked up. We shared a brief nod, the kind that said, "I know why you're here, and I respect what you're doing." The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but the building felt colder, more sterile, as if the warmth I once knew inside these walls had been replaced by suspicion and fear. I made my way to the boardroom, carrying a manila envelope so thick it was nearly bursting with documents. emails, internal memos, financial statements, contract copies, and photographs that painted a damning portrait of systemic corruption. It wasn't just a pile of papers. It was years of betrayal hidden beneath layers of polite corporate facades. The boardroom was a large, intimidating space with a long, polished table, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Then several board members were already seated, quietly conversing in low voices. Among them, I spotted a few familiar faces, people who had always seemed wary of the CEO's heavy-handed style, and others who appeared loyal but wary. Linda Harper, a longtime board member known for her integrity, was already there. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. She knew the weight of what I was about to drop on the table. The tension was palpable. The CEO, unflinching and confident as always, entered last. His usual charismatic smile was absent today, replaced by a guarded, almost calculating expression. He probably sensed something was off, but had no idea just how bad the fallout would be. Once the chairman called the meeting to order, the secretary began handing out the confidential reports. Every board member received a copy, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Paper shuffled, eyes scanned the pages, eyebrows knitted, and the occasional intake of breath broke the heavy silence. I sat quietly off to the side, watching as the evidence unfolded before their eyes. There were spreadsheets showing millions funneled through sham vendor accounts, emails revealing cozy relationships between the CEO's family and favored contractors, and documents detailing unauthorized spending disguised as consulting fees. Every piece told a story of greed and deception. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in disbelief. The CEO's facade cracked, his jaw tightened, his fingers drummed nervously on the armrest of his chair. I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked by anger. "Samuel," the chairman said gravely, "you have laid out a serious case here. Can you assure us these documents are authentic?" I looked each member in the eyes and replied with conviction, "Yes. Every document is verified. I cross-referenced everything with official records and independent sources. This is the truth. Painful, but undeniable." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some board members exchanged worried glances. Others looked visibly shaken. The CFO avoided my gaze, fiddling with a pen as if it might somehow erase the evidence on those pages. Linda stood, her voice calm but firm. "Given the gravity of these findings, I recommend an immediate, independent investigation. To maintain the company's integrity, I believe the CEO and CFO should step aside until the facts are fully reviewed." This statement ignited a spark. Voices rose. Some tried to defend the CEO, citing his years of leadership and past successes. Others demanded swift accountability. The boardroom became a maelstrom of accusations, denials, and calls for action. Outside the room, the impact was no less fierce. Staff whispered in hushed tones, rumors spread like wildfire, and by mid-afternoon, news outlets had picked up the story. Reporters hounded the building's entrance, eager for any shred of confirmation. In the days that followed, the investigation verified much of what I'd uncovered. Executives resigned under pressure, some were suspended, and the CEO's position became untenable. The board eventually forced him to step down permanently, ending a toxic chapter in TechCore's history. Throughout all this, I stayed out of the limelight. I never sought glory or recognition. I just wanted the truth to be known, and for the company to be fixed. The scars from the ordeal would take time to heal, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet pride in what I'd accomplished. I'd taken a stand not just for myself, but for every employee who deserved a workplace built on trust and fairness. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that this was a turning point, for TechCore, for its people, and for me. The CEO was removed after the investigation. I was offered a consulting role to help fix things at TechCore. Though I wasn't back full-time, my efforts were recognized. I learned that integrity matters, and standing up for what's right can change everything.